Okay, good evening. Tonight's session, then we're going to have a look at Introduction to Pilotage. This follows on from our Introduction to Passage Planning that we did last week. It's also up on the training tips on our YouTube site. And tonight we're going to take a look at some simple basic principles of pilotage. So what is pilotage? What are the techniques that we can use? And what are the top tips that I have for you for constructing a pilotage plan? We've got an example on the right-hand side here, where you can see, if I grab my spotlight, over on the right hand side here, we've got a little bit of an example of a passage plan to get in and out of somewhere, and you'll start to see some of these tactics, if you like, or basic principles, these techniques used as we go through the session. Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at this evening. But first of all, what we really need to understand is what pilotage actually is. So this is the definition. We're being able to navigate safely into and out of a harbour, an anchorage or a port, knowing where you are at all times, where your hazards are, and your safe route in and out, okay? Particularly useful if you're heading into somewhere new or a challenging stroke busy area, or both, quite frankly. If we just sail in and out of the same place all of the time, but maybe we do it by daylight only, actually the challenge of getting into somewhere at night could be vastly different to what we would see during the day. So this picture on the right hand side here, this is a screen grab from the RAA chart plotter. This just gives you an idea of perhaps using some transits or some markers, some aids to navigation in order to work my way into somewhere under a bridge and then up into a particular anchorage or a marina. And it's all about how much you can write on a piece of paper whilst you can still read everything that's on a piece of paper. What you can take off the chart, put onto your pilotage plan, which is a notebook, perhaps, rather than just writing it on your chart. Every good skipper should have a notebook full of pilotage or passage plans. So what can you extract from the chart that's really important information? And as I've so often said, we are bears of simple brains, okay? We really are. Let's not rely on our brains to remember everything. Just because you remembered it when you read it on here, you know, I can look at this light here and go, oh, look, it's a red light. It flashes every 2.5 seconds, 15 meters above mean high water springs, visible for a nominal range of 5 nautical miles. The chances of me remembering that again at 8 o'clock tonight are pretty slim. So what we're talking about is, what do we need to take from our plan? What do we need to take from our charts, from our pilotage books, whatever it is we're using, and get onto a good quality pilotage plan that we can read, and that we can read when it gets a bit lumpy, or that we can read when it gets a bit stressed. So if we're sailing into somewhere and actually you're having a bit of a stress getting your sails down, getting the engine on, actually your crew aren't performing how you want them to, how can you still manage that pilotage without it being a really complicated activity? So that's what we're looking at for our pilotage. Where do we even start? Well, for a starter for 10, we want to have some documentation, and there are heaps and heaps of places that we can go to. We've got our charts, and we've got different zooms of charts, so different levels of charts, whether we have a main chart with a smaller chartlet in there, or whether we have something like a whole Admiralty portfolio, whether we have some of the larger Admiralty charts, some of the IMRAE charts. We can also take a look at our almanacs. So here I would tend to use a Western almanac rather than the whole Reed's almanac, because I'm not so interested in my students knowing what the tide is doing in Denmark or what the tide is doing in Portugal. We tend to just look on the western coast here. I can also use my pilotage books. So here I've got the Bristol Channel and Severn Cruising Guide, and there are hundreds of pilot books. You know, Peter Cumberledge, bless him, has written hundreds of books. And this is where somebody has written this book. They have sailed in all of these areas, and they've thought, you know what? I'm going to take some pictures, I'm going to write some stuff down, and I'm going to give some people some clues as to what happened to me or what not to do. Or when I went sailing, hey, the tide did this. And so I'm going to write it down in a book for you to read. I can also go now really to Marina and Harbour website. So this is an extract from Boat Freight, which is the marina I have here, Portishead Marina, and it gives me some pilotage notes as to how to get to the marina here. I've also got a marina plan that I can possibly download. So it's talking about how I can approach, whether I'll see the pier, if I'm approaching in darkness, and how much research you do depends on what kind of a person you are. You don't need to know absolutely everything, but it's difficult to know where to stop sometimes, okay? Local ports will also offer some recreational guidance or navigation guidance, perhaps for small craft. So this is the extract from the Bristol Port Company here. This is freely available on their website. So never underestimate being that little bit of an investigator and going looking on the websites of local places, local harbours, local marinas, because you can bet your bottom dollar that somebody has said, hey, here is a video of how to get in here, or here is some notes about how to get in here. We've got our 4 stages of passage planning. We covered those in the last session. So the appraisal, the plan, the execution, and the monitor. And what we're looking at there is APEM. And we're really putting our pilotage into the planning, okay, our main planning. Elements of it will fit into the appraisal, like can we get into somewhere? What are the restrictions? Do we have any tidal gates, locks, opening hours, that kind of thing? But the vast majority of the actual pilotage plan I would put into that planning phase. So we're looking at what we can get into there. And what I would say is that the pilotage plan is a bit like we used to use the old A to Z. We used an old A to Z to get out of a city or to get into a city, and then we would use our old road atlas to drive up the A roads and the motorways. It's exactly the same. So our pilotage plan gets us in and out of somewhere. Our main passage plan gets us from A to B. So I would do my pilotage plan to a jumping off point, if you like, where I know I'm not going to run into any things anymore. I'm in fairly safe water and I can set sail. I've not got to round any buoys or worry about any rocks or worry about any sandbanks, okay? So that's where I'm looking at mainly for my pilotage plan. So what can we actually use? Well, heaps of stuff. And I'm sure some of the more experienced amongst you watching tonight will be able to pop some other things in the chat that I'll perhaps miss, but I've just gone for some of the major ones, okay? So let's have a start with some transits then. And transits can be made from pretty much anything. Here I've got an idea that we've got some transits from a bay. We've got this transit line that goes from one headland to the other. And depending on where we are on this line will depend on what we see. And here you can see the pictures that we might reasonably expect. On this top one here, we can just about make out that second headland behind the forward headland, whereas on the second picture, we're in a slightly different position and we can see very much more of the headland. So our transits don't have to be any specific aids to navigation. They could just be lumps of land, okay? So this is the first thing that we're looking at. Here we're looking at a transit to say, I don't want to be over in this area because this is full of rocks and shallow areas. So I don't want to be able to see too much of this back headland here, or too little of this back headland here, because if I can see too little of the back headland there, then I'm too far over to where I want to be. So I can use my transits and have a look at those pictures to have a guide onto where I am looking and what I am looking at. This bottom picture, I must be sitting out here somewhere because I can see a good part of the far end of the bay. What do they look like in reality? Well, all sorts of things, okay? All sorts of things. Couple of pictures for you here to show you we've got 2 transits, but these are also lit transits. You can see that they've got various lights on the top of them. Okay, so these are 2 different shapes, 2 different triangles, and if they are lined up, I'll show you a video in just a second looking at lining transits up. But also I've got an extract here again from the RYA training charts. We've got a bay that we need to come through. We've got this line happily marked on the chart to get us all the way down through the center of this entrance on a particular heading. And also we've got these 2 transit markers on the land that we can line up. So if we are looking at those 2 transit markers and they are in line with each other, then we must be on this line. If they are not in line with each other, we must be too far off our main line. So we would need to drive back onto our line in order to get to where we want to go. We can also use these as leading lights. So in the daytime, great, we can see the shapes and we can see the different colors, but by night, we're going to need to have some lights on the top of them. And in this instance, we've got the lights on the marina entrance here. So we know that if they are in line, we are dead on this line, okay? And we can line those lights up. And part of my pilotage plan would be to understand what color are the lights? Are they flashing? Are they fixed? Where am I reasonably expecting them to see? So for example, this rearward light here, how high up that hill is it? Okay, is it slap bang on the bottom here? Because it would be actually quite well hidden in there, or is it further up a hill and that's what I would be expecting? What can they actually look like at night then? Well, they can look a little bit like this. The top picture here I've got is showing you two transit lights, are these leading lights which are directly in line, which says to me if that was my plan and I wanted them in line, I am dead on where I want to go. If I look at the picture on the bottom, they're not quite in line, which says I'm a little bit too far off to the starboard side of this transit. So in order to bring this transit back, I would need to pass, they'll move the boat across to the port side. I would need to drive towards the bottom or the forward light to bring them back into play. Okay, so this is a video that we took when we were in Milford Haven this summer. And what it shows you is our motor cruiser approaching down the main area of Milford Haven, and it just gives you an idea of what the reality of transits looks like. Okay, I leave it to play because I do a little voiceover on the video. So bear with me a second. I get.
On top of two posts, and at the moment you can only see one of the white triangles because we're absolutely on the line. But if Jake brings the boat around the port, you'll start to see that the transits will start to open up. And if he brings the boat around starboard, driving towards the bottom transit, you'll start to see that the transits will start to close again. So in order to get the transit in the right line, you need to drive the boat towards the bottom one or the nearest one. So we're heading back across the starboard now, and you can see the transits are starting to close. And as they close, we can bring the boat back around to port. And we are dead on the transit because we can only see the one triangle. There we go, transits.
Okay, so what I'll do is just bring you back to the main screen. Hopefully you guys can now see you're back to, should be back to the PowerPoint slides, is that right? Yeah, fabulous. Okay, so that's how we can start to use leading lights on transits, okay? And what you'll see is that transits are used all over the place. Leading lights are used all over the place, and you'll see a whole range of things. So we've got an idea over here where we've got some, where's my little spotlight? Is that showing me? You're seeing the PowerPoint slides, right? Yeah, okay. Alrighty, bear with me. Okay. So on the left-hand side here, we've got an extract, and what we can see is that the transits have been marked, or these leading lights, these leading lines have all been marked so that we can head into this particular bay. And part of our pilotage plan would be to understand that we would be driving down this particular transit, looking at these two flashing red lights. And when we get to the stage where these two transits off on our starboard side, remember our boat's coming down this way, start to come into line, we would then change our heading onto 262 degrees. And again, when we have this light directly astern of us, and we've got the light on the bridge coming into play here, we would then again change, and there's probably another transit down further here. So we can use these to work our way into places. And let's face it, harbours don't want you running aground. So if they can put some things out to help you, then they're probably going to, okay? Same on the right-hand side here, we've got a couple of leading lights, which is showing us leading lights to come in through either of these breakwaters, okay? We've either got the flashing green with the occulting green behind it off the fish dock here to come in through this breakwater on this side of Lang Point, or we're on the far side where we have the occulting green with an ISO green. But again, you need to have written this down on your plan, because if you haven't written it down on your plan, how can you possibly remember what it is you're looking for? And if you've then got somebody else looking at your plan whilst perhaps you do some steering, how are they going to know? So we can also use some local features. And this is where we would be looking. Some of this we can take from Navionics, some of this we can take from websites. So on the left-hand side here, I've got an extract from Navionics. This is from Poole Harbour, which gives me a boat channel. And actually here is the main channel going down through Poole Harbour. And actually what I've got underneath it here is a small boat channel. And it's asking the smaller craft with drafts up to 1.5 meters can go down this side here. Okay, so I'm already adding to my seamanship by saying the harbour have put this here for a reason. They don't want you going down the main channel, so actually that's what I'm going to use. On the right hand side then I've got the entrances into Cowes, and I've got enormous amounts of information here. I've got information about there being some cross currents. I've got the information about what happens with the commercial vessels and some ferries. I've got the fact what the breakwater is doing, what it's lit by. And again, what I need to understand is not just to regurgitate everything that is in there. I need to say, what do I really need to know? And what do I need to know for an entry by day? And what do I need to know for an entry by night? This is an extract from the Milford Haven Port Harbour Authority, and they have put a little sort of mini chart, if you like, or a diagram of the main harbour. And interestingly here, as well as colour coding it for different areas, so we've got jet ski areas, we've got water ski areas, we've got dead slow minimum weight, we've got sail training areas. So we've also got noticed that we've got tug wash for the entrance of the West Channel, where they're escorting tankers. And having sat in that harbour when the whole tug wash comes across, I can tell you there's plenty of tug wash in Milford Haven. Okay, but as I come down the haven here, I've also got to keep clear of the tanker terminals. I've got sea caution, and what it's telling me is that all vessels of less than 20 meters, which can only navigate safely in the fairway, should navigate with extreme caution. The users are advised that port vessels and police will patrol near the terminals. Okay, so there's all sorts of information that's on here, but already as a skipper in my head, I'm saying, right, so if I am coming down the haven, what I need to understand is there may well be some water skiing going on this right hand side. There's a lifeboat here. Actually, as I come down past the terminals, I need to keep a good distance away, particularly if there's any manoeuvring going on. And I'm either popping up into Milford Marina here, or I may be carrying on further down, which is incidentally where that video was taken, just down here on the other side of Pembroke Dock, or I'm heading up into Nayland. So I can start to get that information. And actually, if it's something that I want to download and put onto my iPad, or if it's something that I perhaps want to print out and have a copy on my boat, then that's not a bad idea. I also have to think about calling points, but not necessarily because I need to call, because if I'm a vessel under 20 meters, I probably don't need to call. There are some areas where I do need to call. But here we've got a couple of calling points. This one is just off Nelson's Point coming out of the River Avon. Here, there's a small calling point there. The chart symbol for the calling point at the top there, that's giving you calling points going in and out of somewhere. And also this is a radio reporting line symbol for the chart there as well. But this is about vessels coming out of the River Avon, calling Bristol VTS at Nelson's Point for any commercial traffic. But this says vessels of 30 meters and greater. Whereas if I take a look on the right-hand side here, I've got going at the Hamble Point Buoy, going up to the River Hamble. I've got vessels longer than 20 meters are required to get in touch with the Solent, Southampton and Portsmouth port operations. So it might not be that I need to do that. What it might be is that actually I can listen to the VTS channel, I can listen to the port operations channel and understand what is going on around me. If I was planning a night passage up the river and I'm tuned into channel 12 on dual watch with 16, then I will also hear a vessel calling to come out of the river. So as I make this quite tricky set of transits in some fairly shallow water, I would know that there was a vessel that was coming in. So the calling point doesn't necessarily need to be for you to use. It could just be for you to listen to. My clearing bearings and waypoint webs start to get a little bit more complicated, so we'll just start with a clearing bearing. Effectively, what I want to do is put a clearing bearing onto a chart so that I can avoid running the wrong side of a line. So I've drawn my line on the chart here, and I've said if I have 45 degrees towards this easterly cardinal marker, if I am less than 45 degrees using my hand bearing compass, I must be over here. If I am more than 45 degrees, I must be over here. Over here is bad, rocks, shoals, sandbanks, whatever. Over here is good. And this is a really easy way of saying, even if it's not you as the skipper, you could say to someone, grab the hand bearing compass and just tell me what the bearing is to that particular buoy. You can see the buoy, perhaps see it flashing at night. And if it's 40 degrees, happy days, I'm on the right side. If it's 47 degrees, then already I am the wrong side of that line and I can start to take some avoiding action. I can put clearing bearings together then in order to try and get me into somewhere to avoid. On here, I'm trying to get into what looks like a nice little anchorage or up into a river entrance. I've got rocks on both sides. And what I've done is I've said, don't ever be over here. So if my compass tells me it's more than 105 degrees to this end of this breakwater, the lighthouse, the point, whatever is on there, then I am, you know, over in this bad area. So I would need to change course, particularly if I am looking at tacking into somewhere. Ideally, if I was motorboating, I would just want to motorboat straight across, okay? And I'd be able to pop a waypoint perhaps and say, just have bearing to waypoint. But here I'm giving myself limits so that if I have got to tack, I can tack onto a heading and say, never let the bearing to that particular point become less than 70 degrees. So when we get to here and we're looking at perhaps something like 80 degrees, then I would be saying, now I want to consider my next tack. So I can use my clearing bearings to avoid things to guide me into somewhere or to avoid a simple area. And again, I would be using my hand bearing compass, just simply looking at the thing. By day, the thing, by night, the lights. My waypoint webs start to get a little bit more complicated. This is where I have drawn a waypoint web onto my chart. And what I have done is put some simple labels in. So here is the waypoint that I am looking at. That's where I want to get to. And what I'm going to do is use my GPS and say, okay, so if I put my GPS and say, take me to that waypoint, if the bearing to waypoint is currently saying 105 degrees, my distance to waypoint is saying 0.75 nautical miles, where on this particular waypoint web am I? So I can easily pop myself in between the half mile and the full mile there. I'm slap bang in the middle at 105 degrees. It's a really easy way of knowing where I am. So I'm combining clearing bearings really with also having marked out the waypoint web to say, well, where exactly am I? Is this good or is this not so good? If I've decided that 140 degrees is as far round as I want to be, and I start reading 135, 138, 140, we need to do something about a course correction. So to get in here, I've already done that planning and said, never let that be greater than 140 degrees, because I will be literally coming across Hinder Sound, and that doesn't look so great. I can use contouring depending on the depths and depending on how accurate the depths are, okay? We tend to have buoys laid on contours, certainly the bigger buoys, so some of the shipping would tend to be laid around the contours, okay? But if you don't have so much buoyage and you don't have so many navigational marks to follow, then you could reasonably pick a contour and sail along it as long as you know your height of tide. Then you'd be able to say, if I've got the 2 meter contour, say I've got 5 meters of tide, if I'm driving my boat, and I'm at 7 meters, then I know that I am on that contour. Any more than that, I have come too far off my contour. Any less than that, I am heading too far into land. And a big advantage, particularly, like say, if you're doing this in restricted visibility, is that you know where the shallower water is. So you always would know which way to turn in order to find deeper water if you were thinking that your plan wasn't quite going as you had wanted it to. Talking of contours and tides, then, one of the big things I tell all my students is have an idea of what your minimum depth is. And if you choose your minimum depth and say, my minimum depth today is going to be 2 meters, anything less than that is dangerous, then stick to it. Don't start driving your boat into somewhere and go, yeah, 2 meters, 1.8 would be all right. 1.5 will be all right, because you've got no idea how quickly that perhaps is going to shoal, okay? So what is the minimum depth that you're expecting all the way through your pilotage? Okay, you look at somewhere like this, we're going up into Emsworth here, your Emsworth Yacht Haven. It's going to be quite important that we have a minimum depth, because if we come too far out of that channel and we start to encroach on those drying heights, then there's potential danger written all over this, okay? So here's my tidal curve. I'd have my tidal curve as part of my pilotage plans for going in and out of the harbours, but what is the minimum depth that I would be expecting, particularly where I might be coming out of a challenging entrance? Log signals, then, another one to think about. Yes, they're in the almanac. Yes, if you're used to operating somewhere like we do here, where we see lock signals all of the time, then they're great. But if you're going somewhere new and you've got a lock to get into somewhere, do you really know what all of these signals mean? We've got a do not enter on 3 reds. What if it's flashing reds? Okay, we've got that's an emergency all stop. Proceed with 3 greens. Well, a green, white, green would give you enter on instructions. Again, don't try and remember it. If you were sailing, say, to Cardiff Barrage, I picked these up off the Cardiff Barrage website tonight. If you were sailing into Cardiff Barrage, then these are the instructions that you are going to be given, okay? Enter on instruction means that you have called them. So then a part of my pilotage plan, write down, part of my communications plan is to say, I need to call the barrage and I need to tell them that I would like it, or ask them if I can have a lock in or a lock out. If you're sailing at night, then have a consideration for your background lighting. This is a picture taken. This is Portby and Avonmouth. And as you can see, there are quite a lot of lights. Some of those are lights for navigation. Some of those are street lights. Some of those are great big lights on cranes. So what am I realistically going to see? What by day might be a really easy entrance because it's really obvious, by night might be a real challenge. You know, if my students say to me, I'm looking for the red flashing light, I'm like, well, good luck with that. Okay, because there are plenty of them to see going into the port. So choose your lights carefully. So what should your pilotage plan look like? Okay, there's a couple of examples off on the right hand side, and it very much depends on what kind of person you are. It doesn't need to be super, super pretty. It doesn't need to be done to scale. It just needs to be accurate. So I find drawing a picture is quite accurate. You can see the one down here. We've got a particular route in and out. We've got some shingles on the left hand side. We've got some buoys marked on there. So what are my top tips for putting your pilotage plan together? Keep it really simple. Don't just simply regurgitate your chart, because you may as well just sail with your chart, okay? You don't need everything off the chart. What are the key things? What are the obvious things that you're going to see? What are the obvious lights that you're going to use? What are the things that are going to keep you nice and safe? Always make it clear and easy to read, and use symbols. Okay, the one at the top here, you can see I've got a couple of symbols in for the buoys. I've also got different colors. Great if I'm using it by day, not so great if I'm using it by night. Okay, so use, and if you can see down here, we've got quite a few of the port hand laterals that we've got in. We've got all sorts of marks that we can have down here. So have it so that you know what they are. Use the top marks of buoys. Mark your bearings really clearly, okay, so that you have an idea of what you actually need to sail. The one at the top here has actually split it into leg 1, leg 2, leg 3, leg 4, leg 5, and rather than putting everything on the diagram at the top, has started to write them out. But make sure that you've got an idea of what the bearings are that you want to use. Make sure you've got any minimum depths, expected depths, and particularly any tides that you need to worry about. Is there a tidal set across the entrance, which is really quite horrendous at a particular state of tide and I would want to avoid, for example? Okay. Keep my light characteristics simple. Again, just go for some simple ones. If I'm looking for an occulting green and it's the only occulting green, I probably don't need to write all of the heights and so on and so forth if there's just one occulting green for me to find. That said, if I go sailing somewhere like Poole Harbour with the number of buoys in both the North Channel and the main channel, I might want to write a little bit more information. But again, might not need every single buoy. I might not need the light characteristics of every single buoy, but maybe some of the more obvious ones, particular ones which are quick red flashing or red flashing, something that's really easy to see. Clearly mark your route on it so that you know, and perhaps use a different colour. I actually want to go here, 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 and here. That's where I want to go. Stick an arrow on it to show which way you want to go. So that if you hand your route over to someone, your pilotage plan over to someone, they're not literally turning it round going, well, which way up is this, skipper? Which way are we going in? Are we going out? What do you want to do? Clearly mark your hazards. On the right hand side here, we've got shingles. Okay, that sounds quite dangerous to me. I would rather not be there. So what are the hazards? Is it shipping? Is it some shallow areas? Is it some rocks? Is it a prohibited area? Okay, what are the things? Can I nip out through a small entrance, or do I need to go the long way around? And then look at your aids to navigation, whether you're using traditional aids to navigation, so buoys, lighthouses, bridges, that kind of thing, or whether you're looking at using some more of the more electronic aids to navigation, whether I'm using my radar, whether I've got AIS, whether I've got an AIS signal on any of the buoys, whether I've got a Raycon on some of the main navigation marks going into a harbour, perhaps. And don't forget to use landmarks. So towers, lighthouses, masts, anything that you would see that would normally be written on the chart. It may be that I want to head up the channel and turn right when the radio mast is on a bearing of 90 degrees. Simple things that are going to be easy to spot. And is it waterproof? Okay, this very much depends on your boat. If you create the most beautiful of beautiful pilotage plans, it's got labels on it, it's got marks on it, it's got colors on it, it looks absolutely fantastic, and then it's not waterproof, and you take away over your boat and it disappears into papier-mâché, you're still lost. Okay, so does it need to be in a notebook, on a waterproof notebook? Does it need to be inside a waterproof cover? How are you going to make sure that your plan is going to stand the test of time? So here we are. This is the end of tonight's session. These are the objectives we looked at. We looked at some basic principles of pilotage. We've looked at a few pilotage techniques. Like I said, I'm sure when I open it up for discussion, there will be some more that I have forgotten, and some basic tips for constructing a pilotage plan. So like I said, this is the final session of lockdown 2. Our next session is certainly the final free session. We have a session on Saturday going into much more detail on both the passage planning and the pilotage. This is a 3-hour session this Saturday between 9:30 and 12:30. Much smaller sessions, much more interaction, and you guys get to have much more of a go. So thank you for listening this evening.